the left doesn't trust the consumer. The left trusts government. We trusted the consumer, whether it's in education, which was the whole reason for charter schools and vouchers, which I support. But we just trust the consumer, and you can do a better job of deciding what's in your son's best interest. And then you're going to be more conservative fiscally because you're going to benefit as well from the savings as is government.
So for 24 years before Bill Owens became governor, we didn't have a Republican governor. And since then, let's see, we got 16 years without a Republican governor. So the guy in the middle, our friend Bill Owens, hey, good seeing you again.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I always hate how much you're enjoying civilian life. So we go out for a beer and you're just too damn happy, and I don't like that. What do you miss the most?
You know, I miss having a significant impact on public policy, and like you, you're in this sector because you care about policy, and that's why I was in politics. It wasn't for politics' sake, as it were. It was really to impact policy, to improve education, choice, the taxes, do the things that you and I work together on almost every case together doing. And I miss that. I'll see the legislature doing something stupid, and I'll think, boy, I'd veto that. I actually vetoed 41 bills my last year alone. And that's a nice power to have.
You were thinking about, and don't tell me you weren't because it was right there if you wanted it. I think you were thinking about running for Senate for a while, and you chose not to. You finished out your term doing that, and I can only think what might be different if you were a senator. Any regrets on that one?
No, except as a public-spirited person. Had I won one of the races in Colorado that went to a Democrat, there might have been a time when that 50-50 Senate would have been 51-49, and that, as an American citizen, would cause me regret. That if I could have changed that, perhaps I should. But I don't have any regret about not being in the Senate. If somebody said, Bill, if you'd be in the Senate, it'd be 51-49, I would say, well, okay, if you appoint me and I don't have to run again. But the damage that this 50-50 Senate is doing to the country, which is really 51-50, is significant. And I just think back to Georgia, and if we had just won one of those two races, our history today would be so different.
Bring it to Colorado, in that you and I are now at the age where you go, I remember when, and you were a state senator, you were a state treasurer, and you teed off against Democrats, both Dick Lamb and Roy Romer. And I look back now at the days of Dick Lamb and Roy Romer, and I go, I would take those Democrats in a heartbeat, in that today's Democrats in the state capitol are a whole different breed. I mean, you worked with them, you helped contract out, privatize RTD's services, and that governor signed it, Roy Romer. You were so involved in charter school legislation.
And he signed it.
And he signed it. And I'm just not seeing any of that today. Instead, I'm seeing a radical, and I do mean radical, leftist agenda going on. What is the difference between the Democrats you worked with and fought for all those years, including as governor, and what's going on today? What's the difference in character? What are you seeing?
It is stunning to look at the difference you've just outlined and compare it to the Democrats that I used to know and when they were wrong, fight, which was often. But we fought as ladies and gentlemen, and we fought within a construct that was essentially moderate left versus moderate right. And I'm not a moderate, I'm a conservative. But in fact, I would work with them to get something that I wanted. And today that doesn't happen. They ram it through. You look at this legislature and some of its proposals, and you just think, where is this moderate Democratic Party? And the moderate Democratic Party has been defeated. Well, the press focuses on my party and its extreme. They never focus on the Democratic Party and the challenge of basically AOC being personified on city councils and state legislatures around the country.
You know, I look at Roy Romer, and that I'm kind of using him as an image of what Democrats were in this state. Here's a guy who came from the farm area. He used to, sell John Deere or whatever it was, and I heard him talk about Holly one more time. I was going to slap him, but they understood that Colorado was more than just the urban corridor of Boulder and Denver.
Right.
And now we've got a Boulder-Denver voting base that is pushing things like the Family Leave Act, which is going to destroy small businesses. Mm-hmm. That same group is voting to parachute killer wolves into somebody else's backyard. Mm-hmm. There's just a disconnect from the people who work the land in the rural areas and the people who work computer keyboards in Boulder and Denver.
Right.
And I never thought I'd see it growing up here. I don't know if it is reversible. Mm-hmm. How worried are you about, I want to start with Colorado and then we'll go to the nation. How worried are you about the future of Colorado?
Well, I'm very worried. You look at what they're doing, a public option bill that's going through the legislature right now that is just incredibly left-wing in terms of what it does. And let's see if it passes. But if it does, it's going to change healthcare for Colorado in ways that we can't imagine. Just as the Family Leave Bill, which hasn't yet been noticed by Colorado because it's not yet really been implemented, when it's implemented, it's going to drive jobs out of here. The change in criminal justice, probably never a more lawless time on the streets. When you look at Denver murders up 50%, statewide murders up 35%. In my day, that would have caused a special session, and we would have addressed it. Yesterday, I see that the Democrats in the state legislature are bragging that there's only 15,000 people in prison in Colorado, the lowest in recent history. They're proud of that. The way I look at prisons is that's where you put bad people. And if they're not in prison, they're on the streets. And right now, they're on the streets committing crimes instead of being in prison. And my friends in the Democratic Party think that's the way it should be, that they should be out on the streets, harming us rather than in their 8 by 12 foot cell.
Don't worry, they're in a 6 by 6 tent now all along the streets of right. Colorado. Bringing that to the national issue, because you've always been a fan of national politics and international politics. Mm-hmm. I think particularly you've got you have a fascination with the Soviet Union, mm-hmm. the former Soviet Union. I remember even early in your career, you'd always come back from these trips and you'd give out people rubles. Mm-hmm. And I worry about that too, because I look at those pieces of paper and I'm worried that the American dollar might be going to that. Right. What goes on in D.C. has a direct impact going on here.
Right.
We are now flush with money. I mean, you had to steer Colorado during the some recessions and there were some tight times. Wouldn't it have been nice if money just rained on you as governor the way that is raining on this legislature? One estimate said, was it 36 billion or 39 billion have come since COVID. I mean, that is more than the state spends in an entire year, including all the money they usually get from
Absolutely.
DC. It's mind-boggling.
It is. It's stunning. In answer to your question, I mean, if any government in Colorado says that it's been negatively impacted by COVID on a revenue side, my suggestion as a conservative is don't believe it. There might be one government in 20 that, as an exception to this rule, for an aberrant reason, doesn't have as much revenue, but I don't know where it is. Denver is flush. The state of Colorado is flush. Littleton is flush. Yet in Littleton, I'm seeing the taxpayer-paid newsletter from the city of Littleton, and they're talking about their revenue shortfall, and they've hired a consultant and a pollster to start to get ready for the next Littleton tax increase. And I mean, this is the way government does. It never accepts the fact that, yeah, we've got enough money and we should live within these means. It doesn't do that, and you've spent your life fighting that, as I have too.
Let's talk about taxes for a little bit. When you were governor, I remember it so well. I wish Republicans would learn from what seemed like a very simple thing that you did during your campaign, which was, if I'm elected, there are three things. And I haven't heard a Republican say that. And I can repeat them, tell me if I've got them right. We're going to fund charter schools properly. We're going to widen I-25, and we're going to reduce taxes.
And we did.
The reduction from 5% of our state flat income tax rate down to 4.63 spurred an economic boom here, along with the security of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I don't think people understand that there was a whole host of other tax cuts that happened inside that. Something like 40 different tax cuts, but they're all in different areas, and all those are permanent. What kind of tax cuts were those back then?
Well, and thank you for bringing that up, because obviously you and I had a one momentary disagreement on Ref C, which we can talk about in a second. But I cut taxes permanently on 43 different things, and we would do it on families, we would do it on sales tax, we would do it on items within the sales tax. And because of the beauty of TABOR, which you and I both supported from its inception, and I have
we're old now,
and I have the letter from Doug Bruce thanking me from, we lost the first couple, but finally passed the third one. But because of TABOR, you can't raise these taxes back without a vote of the people, which the Democrats have chosen not to do. But we did. We cut the flat tax, which incidentally Chris Paulson and I put in the statutes of the 1980s. That was our bill, to change Colorado's tax code to a single rate.
Right, and that was the work that Barry Paulson and John Andrews did here at the Independence Institute.
And they provided the backup to Chris Paulson and my introducing the bill, and then we passed it, and then TABOR allowed it to become constitutionalized.
When Barry Paulson, our economist, did the calculations for a switch over from the old progressive tax to the flat tax, the revenue neutral amount was going to be 4.5%. Pardon me, we're geeking out here. And of course, the legislature would only pass a 5%.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right. So it was another tax increase.
But then it stabilized
and
forever.
What you were able to do by twice lowering that tax is we're getting closer to that original 4.5%. And with our tax cut last year, Prop 116, we looked at what you did and said, yeah, there's too much money. Just a little bit here, and we plan on doing it again.
You and I worked on 116 together. We worked on CC together, defeating it, so we reduced taxes, and when we felt we needed to take that time out, we went to the voters and had the voters as TABOR. That's the whole purpose of TABOR, is you have to ask the voters permission, and that's what we did, and that's different from
let me get into that for a second.
The Democratic Party.
There are a couple things that I remember about our disagreement on Ref C. One, we were doing a debate live on TV, and they were buffing my bald head with makeup, and you gave me one of those, blank eating grins, and I looked at you and I said, Governor, it's testosterone that causes baldness. And like this, you said, yeah, too bad the same thing will keep you from ever having to use it. All right, so that was your first victory in our debate. But then you won on Ref C. Ref D went down, and I think that's a mixed bag. But it really hit me later on when your predecessors started raising taxes without that vote. And what was crucial about Ref C, whether you liked it or not, you asked.
You bet.
The legislature asked. You had a compromise with the Democrats. You brought this forward. We both made our best guesses. And as you remind me every time we have a beer, you won, I lost. But there was not a backdoor tax the same way we found with the faster fee, which was a tax increase. Same thing with the mill levy freeze, which raised our property taxes. The hospital provider fee, and they're trying to do it this year with a gas tax by calling it a fee. One, I just want to honestly thank you. You didn't have to do that. You had the power to do what they've done afterwards.
Well, this is the way a representative democracy ought to work. We ought to have a debate. We ought to, and again, I've always tried to put Ref C in the context of the other 43 tax cuts. Ref C had an impact for 4.5 years, and as you know, I've been a stalwart defender of TABOR before and after. And even Ref C was within the confines of TABOR you have to ask for a vote of the people.
It has a permanent impact in that it raised the floor. So the state was not facing, after you left, was not facing the same budget constraints you faced as governor. They've been flush ever since. And something like $18 billion more has gone into the state government. So when I keep hearing today them saying, there's just not enough money, it's insulting when you add what Ref C brings in, which is nothing compared to what their tax increases labeled as fees.
I would agree, which is why I joined with defeating Ref CC, why I joined with passing 116, which was the income tax cut, why I joined with passing 117, which said fees now have to go to a vote of the people unless they're pre-existing.
And now they're still finding ways around that.
They are, because of the existing fees. But we're doing some good things in this state. There's some things that are getting back on the right track. But to your underlying question, yes, I'm very concerned about the state of Colorado. We do better under conservative leadership than we do under left-wing leadership. And I'm in favor of having conservatives win more elections.
You are way too polite when it comes to talking about your successors. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to goat you on this because I really want to. So before...
Because you really want to.
Because I really want to.
That's a good reason.
Because before COVID, we had almost the lowest unemployment rate in Colorado. Mm-hmm. Lower taxes, flat taxes, more certainty, and a relatively good regulatory state brought businesses in here. Now, a year after these government-mandated shutdowns, by one estimate, we have the fourth worst unemployment rate in the country. When we look at what's going on with the destruction of the oil and gas industry, mm-hmm. with 181, no meat day, the insult to agriculture, when we look at the Family Leave Act, when we look at all the different regulatory hits, the Air Quality Control Council under this governor is trying to get people, employers, to beat up their employees if they take a car and they need to get into a bus. It is becoming an unfriendly place for employment. If you were governor, I'll put it in a nicer way, if you were governor and COVID hit, what would you have done differently?
You know,
when COVID hit.
You know, what's interesting to me is when it first hit, and let's talk February, March of 2020, and when we had the bend the curve shutdown, I very well might have done that then, because I would have believed the data that we have to protect the hospitals, and particularly the ICUs. But after a relatively short period of time, as our hospitals proved not to have capacity issues, I would have looked at the data and I would have started to open. And I think the states like Florida, like Texas, like South Dakota, I think those states are role models in terms of how a governor should handle COVID. How's that?
That was really diplomatic. I hated it. So let me be a bit more hard-nosed about it. This governor had a repeating lockdown.
Right.
And I think you were governor, when 9/11 hit, it changed so many things. Mm-hmm. And Republicans wanted to be prepared for what the next thing was. Mm-hmm. And we empowered the legislature, and I think you might have signed that bill, mm-hmm. empowered the governor to have these extra powers. You didn't know that 20 years later, a guy would use this to lock down the economy, put everyone under house arrest, destroy small businesses. What would you have done differently with that bill that now gives the governor?
Would have put a time limit on it. Would have required it to be affirmed by the legislature within 30 days or something like that. And many other states are in the same boat. They have executive powers that in a time of emergency, a governor can use. And we've seen Michigan and New York and other states start to pull back that power because nobody ever imagined that it would go on for a year, that a series of 30-day extensions extensions would go on. And so we were not alone in having that power within the governor, but I think that in a representative democracy such as we are, that in fact that legislature has met at least 3 times since COVID, and it would be very appropriate for that legislature to step in under the rule of law and set some parameters.
I was surprised. You know that if there was a Republican governor, they would have passed that time limit. And by the way, it should be passed, doesn't matter. If there was a Governor Trump, Democrats would want that check and balance.
Limit.
And the problem with partisan politics is you get locked into this point of view of, who's in power is going to be in power, forever, not realizing whatever reforms you put in affect the other side.
And that's why I'm a conservative, because the rule of law and the dicta of the Constitution and then law governs fallible people. And everybody's fallible. And that's why, as a conservative, and a constitutional conservative, I like to have the limits placed upon fallible individuals by a constitution and by the rule of law. And so yes, I would be in favor of having something similar to a 30-day window, and then it has to be affirmed by the legislature. And I mean, this is common in some executive orders at the national level. It has to be affirmed, and that's just the way that a democracy and a republic should operate.
I want to talk about some of the policies that have changed since you were governor, because people forget. And I think it's important to remember some of the things that were tried. Let me talk about one that really affects me now, that I really didn't think of when we were working on it together. You had I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a Medicaid reform, and I forget what you called it. It was a Consumer-Directed Medical Care Act.
Right.
And you did a pilot program. And for people who don't know, people on Medicaid, if you are handicapped, if you're stuck in a wheelchair, you get services, but the services are dictated by your community center that gets the Medicaid money and passes it out, and you don't have control of that money. Now that I've been raising a son who has Down syndrome, not only did it take years for him to get onto Medicaid, now any guy can just go online and get his Obamacare like that, but we don't get to control that money. What you did is you gave part of that money to people who were handicapped and said, here's the deal. Here's a hunk of money. You spend it how you want to spend it. And whatever you save, we'll split. That is, you get to put it in your health savings account, and the government gets it back. I'll give you the story. So we get what's called respite care. And so somebody can come over and take care of our son for a while, and that's terrific. That person gets paid, I forget what it is, $12, $14 an hour. But they charge the account something like $19 or $20 an hour. And I was like, well, why are you charging our balance this much when you're paying this much? The one that really got me was a woman who said, on Christmas Eve, I was put to bed by my people taking care of me at 7 o'clock. And I couldn't go out. I couldn't do anything. I was stuck in bed. And then they didn't come that Christmas morning, and I was stuck. And with this reform, she was able to hire friends and pay people more on holidays, and it changed lives. And now that I'm on the other side of that, I wish that reform was still talked about. And the reason I bring it up was that was one of those things that helped people in need, that empowered the most needy in Colorado. And it just disappeared. But yet, by the way, you're part of the team that is cruel to people, but that thing went away.
Yeah, it's because the left doesn't trust the consumer. The left trusts government. We trusted the consumer, whether it's in education, which was the whole reason for charter schools and vouchers, which I support. But we just trust the consumer, and you can do a better job of deciding what's in your son's best interest. And then you're going to be more conservative fiscally, because you're going to benefit as well from the savings as is government. If you wonder why, when you're watching CNBC or any of the national news networks, why there's all these, you can get free hearing aids from Medicaid, you can get free walkers from Medicaid, you can get free everything from Medicaid, it's because this is the way they make money. Even if the consumer really doesn't need it, it's free. Well, that leads to bankruptcies of countries.
One woman I spoke to who had the Lexus of wheelchairs. She was it would go over snow, it would go up and down, it would do all these things that changed her life. She said it cost Medicaid something like $50,000, but if she was able to buy it outside of Medicaid, it would have cost something like $30,000. Yeah, and it's just maddening.
Yeah, it's just government.
And she's thinking, that's 20 grand that I could use to help my situation.
You bet, and you and I just know. I mean, this is inexorable about government. Government maybe has good intentions, but it applies those intentions badly. And that's the challenge of government and these billions that are coming to the state because of COVID relief.
We talk guns a little bit, in that when you were governor, Columbine happened and it rocked the world. And you were there on scene, I remember it, and our offices were close by at that time. It was awful. You also signed on to a preemption law, and that said localities can't do their own gun control. We're going to do this as a state. So in my hometown of Boulder, they tried to pass what they called an assault weapon bill. It wasn't, but I was the criminal who didn't obey. The court said, no, there's a preemption law. You can't do it. My suspicion is the anti-gun crowd is going to try to overturn that so that we can have what they've been doing with minimum wage, which is allow it here and here, and tobacco bans can be here and here. Why is it important to have some of those things on a state level, not on a local level?
It's a good question. It's the reason why we have a uniform set of traffic, for truck standards, because trucks move. Items that move. I would far prefer to have, for guns, for certain other things, a statewide standard that regardless of whether you cross that little line on Broadway, that it's the same on either side of that line. Otherwise, it leads to government, overreaching, filing charges because you went one block off of Broadway and you didn't know you're in a new jurisdiction. And this jurisdiction does A, B, and C. And so obviously there's a role for local control on a lot of the stuff we do, sales taxes, for example, because sales taxes, you can choose which side of the street and generally know. But
zoning rules.
Exactly. I mean, there's a large role for local government, but in this case, I think there is a role in a number of areas for state preemption. There's a reason there's the state of Colorado, and there's a uniform need within the state for certain things. So preemption makes a lot of sense in certain areas, and that's one of them.
You also signed, I think it was in 2001.
You have too good a memory.
I do.
This is a lot of...
Well, I do this every day.
Right,
I remember it like it was yesterday. You signed the concealed weapons law.
Oh, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of almost everything I signed. I fought for that.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened without myself and Ken Cloper.
And what that means for people who don't know is that before, sheriffs could choose who to give a concealed weapons permit to.
If they chose at all.
If they chose at all. I like you, I don't like you. You said, hey, anybody who meets these criteria,
Pretty simple criteria.
Now today, just so you might not be aware, over something like 9% of all Colorado adults have a concealed weapons permit. And for me, that's just an amazing statistic. And the highest growth is with women. And after what's happened in Aurora, what happened in the very shopping store that I go to, the King Soopers, more and more people are using this option. Any regrets on?
None at all. Strong believer in concealed carry, and had to push it, had to do had to threaten legislatively some things. And the reason was that the bad guys always will have guns because they don't care about a permit. What I wanted to do is set up a system where folks that didn't have a criminal record, who had passed a basic rudimentary firearms class to make sure that they understood the lethality of firearms, could in fact apply to a sheriff and be given a permit. I have one. I got one almost the minute I left office as governor. Members of my family have concealed carry permits. They're safer and the state is safer because of it. I'm not aware of gunfights breaking out in heavy traffic between concealed carry permit holders. Just doesn't happen.
I'm not even aware of a crime by one of the
me either.
Crime.
Because
not that it hasn't happened, because you're going to get a background check.
Right.
And if you do something, you lose the permit instantly.
And I know you have a permit, and I'm not afraid of Jon Caldara, even though some of my left-wing friends might be. You're not going to go out and shoot people. But you would use it appropriately in times of need for self-defense. So Colorado, that's been a real success story.
Should Colorado outlaw so-called assault weapons?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Really? Okay.
And really, it's just because I'm so confused over what is and isn't, and what used to be banned and what isn't, and it's just not something I'm current on. Not being political, because I'm not running for anything, but I will discuss anything I know enough about. But in this case, I'm 15 years behind that debate.
The war on police that we've seen in the last year, the Black Lives Matter, defund the police. As you know, District 6 is just down the street from the Independence Institute, and there is a lot of downright hatred of cops. Right. And you saw it with the riots, you saw what happened in the defacing of our beautiful Capitol over the summer. Where does that lead? I mean, I'm seeing that Denver is starting to feel a bit like, you remember what New York City felt like in the 70s?
I do.
They kind of like, yeah, you go in and get your business done, and you get out. You don't hang around after dark. And people are scared to come downtown. The encampments that are coming up, including the one in front of the Capitol on government property, on state government property, not city government property. It wasn't until we made it known, and you made it known, that's state property. The state can take care of that. What are the fixes we need?
You know, it's one of the most important questions that we need to ask ourselves, and that is because as a conservative, I believe that the first and primary role of government is public protection. And I believe that it's the federal government's role to protect us from foreign enemies. And I believe it's state and local government's responsibility to protect that single mom out in downtown Denver from being harmed by those who choose to not obey the law. I'm a believer in law and order. I really am. And I realize some libertarians might not go as far as I do, but I really believe that's a fundamental purpose of government. And today we're failing abysmally. When you see murders up 50% in Denver and 30% in the state, it's just incredible. And the crime, the property crime, you'd think during COVID it would have been reduced because nobody could go anywhere, but no. You know, and what needs to happen? We need to have tough judges. We need to have a tough parole board. We need to quit decriminalizing so much a part of the criminal code, which is effectively used, in my opinion, by DAs to encourage future better behavior. We need to put more bad people in prison. I always said that prisons are one of the most cost-effective uses of government funds. You spend $35,000, $40,000 to put a bad guy in prison, you might avoid 15 or 20 or 30 crimes as long as the right bad person. And I do think there are bad people. These aren't just misunderstood people. There are literally bad people amongst us, and I want them behind bars.
Is law enforcement systemically racist?
No.
This is in that you can make a case. No. I look at the difference between cocaine laws versus crack laws, and this one is punished much more, even though they're basically the same thing. So there are a lot of evidence that say, hey, it's stacked up the wrong way. That police officers are racist, and that's why there are more black victims from cops. I just want to get your take on this, because you've ridden along with cops, you've talked to cops, you ran. I believe the National Guard even had an MP unit. Tell me why they're not racist. All this evidence. I've been told by lots of good professors, and those professors wouldn't be wrong.
Reasonable people can differ, and I know so many police officers, And I've ridden with the police officers out of District 6, just almost literally next door to where we're sitting, on a Saturday night in downtown Denver. And I just don't see policemen and women as systematically racist. And I just have a difference of opinion. I could walk through the numbers with you, but at this, today we call lots of things systematically racist, and I think it's become a epithet that is not challenged enough. When you asked me, are police systematically racist, I immediately said no, and I'd say hell no. There are racists on police forces. There are racists in colleges, and each race has, in fact, racists within it. That's human nature. It's to be confronted and fought, but I am not one who goes around calling my political enemies racist because of a difference of opinion over an issue.
How many times have you been called racist?
A few times.
Yeah, I've done talk radio. That's all I am.
Right. So
let's wrap this up on just a couple foreign questions. You and I remember the fall of the Soviet Union, something that I think when we were kids, we never thought would happen.
Right.
What is your worry internationally for the United States right now? I know you travel internationally, you have international business.
It's China.
Tell me specifically.
1.3 billion people with a semi-market economy, which actually functions pretty well. The old Soviet Union had a command economy which couldn't function. Today's China has a regimented, disciplined 1.3 billion. It has control of the media in a way that nobody could ever do in the old days. They cut off, they cut off Google, they cut off Facebook, and they're molding that 1.3 billion people into a force that we need to recognize as eventually an existential threat. Today, they're definitely a threat to the U.S. Navy. They're definitely a threat to their neighbors. And there could come a time, if we don't course correct, that they could existentially be a threat to us.
What is that course correction? I mean, on law enforcement, you say we need to enforce these laws, we need to build more prisons, we need to put people away. I couldn't agree with you. Bring it over here. They have 3-4 times the population.
Right.
They have natural resources. They don't follow the same environmental laws, so they can do whatever they want. Imagine if the Soviet Union had an endless supply of money.
Yeah.
That's what they have.
You're right.
And I'm concerned about that. I'm seeing what's going on in Hong Kong.
Right. They've taken Hong Kong.
They've taken Hong Kong. We haven't done anything.
Taiwan's next.
Right. Taiwan's next. And it reminds me a little bit of our failure in the fall of Vietnam. All these good freedom lovers, we did not save them. And I'm looking at Hong Kong, and I know it was an English colony, but the West is not saving these people. We're not getting them out. What's the solution?
It's not an irreversible. Nobody predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union except a few conservative historians. And China does face a large number of problems, but what it really needs is the West to be united against us, as the West really was against the Soviet Union. Germany stood with us, Helmut Kohl, Canada with the Prime Minister, Britain always there, and the West pushed back and confronted the Soviet Union. And then finally, under the leadership of Ronald Reagan, he gave them the final push. And that's what needs to happen today. The West needs to understand that China is not playing on the world stage the way that other more normalized countries do. And it may take 5 or 10 or 15 years.
Was Trump right with the tariffs? I go back and forth on this.
I do too, and I think Trump was right on a lot about China. The tariffs, as a free trader, I'm in favor of free trade unless somebody else is using free trade against us. And this is kind of like that earlier question. I don't have a hard and fast position on tariffs with China. What I do have a hard and fast position is I'm an American, And as Ronald Reagan said, in any contest, I want America to win. And if this is a contest with China, I want us to win. And I just don't know if tariffs but I do know a strong military projected forward, linked up with the Australians, South Koreans, the Japanese, India, and the countries around the perimeter of China. They do have some challenges, and we need to be more adept at probing those areas that they're weak.
Very last question. What are you going to do next? Why aren't you being a professor somewhere, get tenured and work 10 hours a week?
I get booed off of any college campus because I'm a conservative. And no, I'm trying to stay active. I appreciate what you're doing at Independence. I appreciate what some of the initiatives I've seen in the state that are taking power back to the people. Try to help candidates when I get a chance. Still trying to recover from some of the lost earning years of being in public service, but it's all good, and I love Colorado, and it's certainly worth fighting for.
When you joke about the lost earning years, it's a real thing, and now that we're starting to get a full-time legislature, now that 120 days is whatever they want it to be.
Right.
I think there's going to be a push to make full-time legislatures, and that's going to be dangerous. When you were a state rep and a state senator, you had a real job, and you'd have to take off the time. Once you became a full-time politician, it's not like you got very wealthy off of that.
Well, and most people don't, and it's something that people don't understand.
Some do really well. I mean, you've made connections, you've met people, which I'm certain helps you later on.
Most people in government don't make much money, but they're not in it for that. But I will say that the 120-day limit, Chris Paulson and I again did that. We tried for 90 days, but we couldn't get the votes in the Senate, and I remember the senators who made it 120.
You also have a good memory there.
Just on some things.
Now we're going to have to go back and actually tell them that 120 days means 120 days.
Absolutely.
And in Texas, it's 90 days every other year.
Right.
Yeah.
And in Wyoming, it's if memory serves me correctly, it's 40 days one year and maybe 90 the next. And so, yes.
Gov, always, we'll do it again soon.
This was fun. Thanks.
Take care.
Good.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.